I am Jason, 35 years old, and until last month, I thought I would someday co-own Franklin Custom Furniture, the business I helped build for 15 years. My younger brother Drew returned last year with big ideas but zero experience. Yesterday, Mom and Dad called me over for important news. Sitting in their living room surrounded by furniture I crafted, they told me I was being completely cut out of both the family business and their will, for Drew. My perfect little brother. Before I tell you how my world fell apart, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe if family betrayal stories hit close to home. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland, I witnessed firsthand the struggles my parents endured to establish Franklin Custom Furniture. Dad Thomas Franklin was a talented carpenter who had worked for other furniture makers for 20 years before deciding to venture out on his own. Mom Margaret handled the books and customer relations. They mortgaged our modest house to secure a small workshop downtown, and I still remember the day they got the keys, their faces filled with equal parts terror and excitement. Our dinner conversations revolved around wood types, customer preferences, and cash flow concerns. While other kids spent their afternoons playing video games or hanging out at the mall, I was sweeping sawdust, organizing tools, and eventually learning to sand pieces under Dad's watchful eye. The workshop smell a mixture of fresh lumber varnish and coffee became as familiar to me as the scent of our home. When I turned 12, Dad noticed something in me that would shape my entire future. I had taken scrap pieces and, without instruction, fashioned a small jewelry box with surprisingly clean joinery for someone my age. "You have the hands for this work," he said, a rare moment of explicit praise that I cherished. From that point on, I spent every possible moment absorbing the craft, learning how different woods responded to tools, how to read grain patterns, how to bring out the natural beauty in each piece. In high school, while maintaining decent grades, I developed detailed sketches for potential new product lines. Some evenings I would spread my drawings across the kitchen table, explaining to my parents how we could expand beyond dining tables into bedroom sets and office furniture. They listened sometimes, implementing my ideas, sometimes explaining why they wouldn't work yet, but there was always an unspoken understanding that I was being groomed to take over someday. When college application time came, I specifically chose business management with a marketing minor, not because these were my passion subjects, but because I knew they would complement my practical woodworking skills and help grow the family business. During those 4 years, I worked weekends at the shop, using school breaks to implement new systems I had learned about in my classes. Senior year, several corporate recruiters approached me with impressive offers. One furniture conglomerate dangled a starting salary that made my parents' eyes widen when I mentioned it casually at Sunday dinner. But there was never any real question in my mind. The day after graduation, I was back at Franklin Custom Furniture, this time with a formal title, Operations Manager. The timing was perfect. The internet was transforming how small businesses could market themselves, and I convinced my hesitant parents to invest in our first real website. I photographed our best pieces, wrote detailed descriptions, highlighting our craftsmanship, and set up our first online ordering system. Within 6 months, orders had increased by 30%. Within 2 years, we had hired 3 additional craftspeople to keep up with demand. Those years blur together in my memory, endless 60-hour weeks falling into bed, exhausted only to wake up with new ideas I would jot down before morning coffee. While friends were traveling to exotic locations or buying their first homes, I reinvested every penny of my modest salary back into the business. No vacations, no fancy car, no social life to speak of, beyond the occasional drink with suppliers or clients. When I did manage to date, relationships inevitably faltered under the weight of my commitment to the business. "You're married to that workshop," my last girlfriend had said before walking out. She wasn't wrong. It wasn't until I met Rebecca at a trade show 3 years ago that I found someone who understood my dedication. As an interior designer who often recommended our pieces to clients, she appreciated craftsmanship and the sacrifice it required. Through all this growth, my relationship with my parents remained warm but professional when it came to business matters. Dad and I would debate techniques and materials, sometimes heatedly, but always with mutual respect. Mom and I would review numbers together, strategizing about inventory and cash flow. We were partners in all but the legal paperwork, which Dad always said would come in due time. Drew, my younger brother, was 7 years younger and seemed to exist in a different universe. While I was covered in sawdust, he was winning art competitions and later pursuing architecture at a prestigious school out of state. We saw him primarily during holidays, when he would arrive with impressive drawings and stories of college life. My parents beamed at his accomplishments, always eager to hear his latest adventures. I felt proud of him too, if somewhat disconnected from his world. So it came as a surprise when 3 semesters short of his architecture degree, Drew announced he was taking a break from school to reconnect with his roots and learn the family business. At 28, he had never shown interest in furniture making beyond appreciating the finished pieces. Nevertheless, Mom and Dad were ecstatic, immediately clearing out a storage room to create an office for him. Located, I couldn't help but notice, right next to Dad's, while mine remained in the converted supply closet I had inhabited for years. By this point, Franklin Custom Furniture had grown from its humble beginnings to a respected regional brand with 3 locations, our original workshop, plus 2 showrooms in neighboring cities. Our annual revenue had just crossed $2 million, and we employed 22 people, most hired and trained personally by me. Custom commissions from wealthy clients and boutique hotels formed the backbone of our business, supplemented by our signature line of dining and living room furniture. Rebecca noticed the change in dynamic before I allowed myself to acknowledge it. They treat him differently, she observed after a rare family dinner where my parents had spent the evening enthusiastically entertaining Drew's sudden ideas for business expansion. You built this company with them, but they act like he's bringing revolutionary insights from Mars. I defended them, then explaining that they were just excited to have both sons involved. But deep down, a small knot of unease had begun to form. Drew settled into the business with the confidence of someone who had been there all along. Despite having no practical experience in either woodworking or business management, he immediately began suggesting sweeping changes. His architectural background gave him a vocabulary that impressed our parents, even when his ideas showed fundamental misunderstandings of our production capabilities or market position. Within 2 weeks of his arrival, the modest office next to Dad's had been completely renovated. New desk, ergonomic chair, drawing table, computer setup, and even different lighting than the rest of the workshop. When I pointed out that this hadn't been budgeted for, Mom dismissed my concerns with a wave. We need to make him feel welcome, Jason. This is his heritage too. The first major change came when Drew convinced our parents to renovate our downtown showroom. His vision included custom lighting, moving walls, and high-end display platforms, an investment of $87,000. When I requested to see projections on how this would increase sales, Drew rolled his eyes. This isn't about immediate ROI, it is about brand elevation. You need to think bigger picture. In our weekly management meeting, I presented data showing our highest selling items and customer feedback, indicating that delivery time, not showroom aesthetics, was our client's primary concern. I suggested investing in additional production equipment instead. Dad looked uncomfortable, while Drew leaned back in his chair with crossed arms. That is exactly the kind of dated thinking that keeps family businesses stagnant, Drew declared. People are not buying furniture, they are buying an experience, a lifestyle. The showroom is the first touch point in that journey. Dad nodded slowly. Drew has studied design psychology. I think we should trust his instincts on this. His instincts, I repeated carefully, over 15 years of actual customer data and experience. Mom jumped in her voice, taking on the placating tone I was beginning to hate. Jason, why not give Drew's ideas a chance? You have done wonderful work getting us to this point, but fresh perspectives can be valuable too. The renovation went forward. For 6 weeks, our main showroom operated at reduced capacity, affecting sales during what should have been our strongest quarter. The final result was undeniably beautiful. I could admit that much. But it also fundamentally changed our brand presentation from accessible craftsmanship to something that made middle-class customers feel they couldn't afford to walk through the door. Martin, our production manager, who had been with us for 12 years, pulled me aside after visiting the completed showroom. It is gorgeous, but I am not sure it is us anymore, he said quietly. 3 customers called yesterday asking if our prices had increased because the new space looks so fancy. When I brought these concerns to our next family dinner, Drew immediately went on the offensive. Those are exactly the customers we should be filtering out. Our pieces are worth more than we have been charging. This is Psychology 101. The environment creates perceived value. We built this business on craftsmanship, accessible to middle-class families, I argued. People saving up for furniture that will last generations. And we have been undervaluing our work for years. Drew countered smoothly. Dad, you have always said your pieces should be in museums. Now we are creating a space worthy of that quality. Dad looked between us, clearly torn, before sighing. Maybe there is room for both approaches. We can keep our mid-range production line while developing more exclusive offerings. But in practice, over the following months, resources increasingly flowed toward Drew's vision. He brought in a friend from architecture school to design an ultra-premium line that required specialized hardware imported from Italy and exotic woods that took months to source. Meanwhile, the reliable sellers that paid our bills received less attention and refinement. Rebecca noticed the toll this was taking on me. You look exhausted, she said one evening, when I finally made it to her apartment after 10. And not your usual good tired after a productive day. You look defeated. I just don't understand what is happening, I admitted. Everything I suggest gets questioned now, while Drew can propose spending $50,000 on experimental designs with no pushback. Have you talked to your parents directly without Drew present? I had tried multiple times. Dad was suddenly always busy with special projects he and Drew were developing. Mom deflected with comments about how wonderful it was to have both my boys working together and how I needed to be more supportive of your brother's transition into the business. The real breaking point of this phase came during a major family dinner. Drew had invited his new girlfriend Megan, a sleek marketing executive he had met at a design conference. Within minutes, she and my parents were chatting like old friends, while Rebecca and I exchanged glances across the table. I was thinking Drew announced during dessert we should consider rebranding completely. Franklin Custom Furniture sounds like something from the 1980s. I was thinking Franklin Atelier, or simply Franklin Living Spaces. I nearly choked on my coffee. Rebranding. We have spent 15 years building name recognition and trust with Franklin Custom Furniture. Drew rolled his eyes dramatically. That is exactly the problem. You are still thinking like a small-town operation. With the right positioning, we could be in every major design magazine within a year. With what production capacity, I challenged. Our craftspeople are already working overtime to meet current orders. That is another thing, Drew continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Our production methods are outdated. We should be looking at semi-automation for the basic components. Dad, who had always prided himself on handcrafted quality, frowned slightly but said nothing. You want to automate custom furniture? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. That completely undermines our unique selling proposition. Jason, Mom interjected. Why are you being so negative? Drew is just sharing ideas. Ideas that would fundamentally change everything this business stands for, I replied. Drew set down his fork with exaggerated patience. The problem, Jason, is that you are resistant to any change that wasn't your idea. You have been doing things one way for so long that you cannot see alternatives. I have led every major change in this business for 15 years. I built our online presence, developed our expanded product lines, created our quality control systems, and now you are protecting your territory instead of considering what is best for the company's future. Drew cut in smoothly. I looked to my parents for support and found none. Dad studied his plate while Mom gave me a look that clearly said, "Don't ruin this evening." Later, as we drove home, Rebecca squeezed my hand. They couldn't have built this business without you. They know that. I wished I could believe her. The changes accelerated after that dinner. I began noticing meetings happening behind closed doors Dad drew, and sometimes our accountant or lawyer speaking in hushed tones that would stop abruptly when I approached. When I asked directly what they were discussing, Dad would offer vague responses about long-term planning or exploring options. Meanwhile, Drew systematically inserted himself into my client relationships. Customers I had worked with for years would mention in passing, "Your brother showed me some interesting new concepts when he called last week." Relationships I had carefully nurtured were being redirected without my knowledge or consent. One Tuesday morning, I arrived to find Dad's office door closed, which was unusual for him. When he emerged 2 hours later with Drew, both wearing satisfied expressions, I asked what was happening. "Just finalizing details for our Chicago trip," Dad replied, not quite meeting my eyes. Chicago trip. This was the first I had heard of it. The design showcase, Drew explained with exaggerated patience. "We discussed it last week." No such discussion had occurred in my presence. "When is this happening?" "Next weekend," Dad said. "It is a great opportunity to make connections with some high-end designers." "I will check my calendar." I began already mentally rearranging commitments. "Actually," Drew interrupted, "we need someone to hold down the fort here. Several large orders are due that week." The implication was clear. I was being deliberately excluded from a business development opportunity while being expected to manage production deadlines. The orders in question were ones I had secured and developed specifications for. Of course, I knew they were due. Later that day, I overheard Drew on the phone in his office door ajar. "No, it is coming together perfectly. They are starting to see that the business needs fresh blood. Less of the old-school thinking that has limited growth potential." That evening, I stayed late, reviewing our financial reports, something I had been too busy putting out daily fires to do thoroughly in recent weeks. The numbers told a disturbing story. While our gross revenue was up slightly, our profitability had decreased significantly. Drew's initiatives were costing substantially more than they were generating, and our cash reserves, which I had carefully built up over years, were diminishing rapidly. When I presented these findings at our next management meeting, Drew dismissed them with a wave. "This is expected during a transition phase. We are investing in future positioning. We are burning through cash at an unsustainable rate," I countered. "At this pace, we will have serious cash flow problems within 6 months." Mom looked concerned, but Dad nodded along with Drew. "Sometimes you have to spend money to make money, son." Drew has shown me projections for next year that look very promising. Projections I had never seen, despite ostensibly being the operations manager. The Chicago trip came and went. I learned they had committed to participating in a high-end furniture showcase that would require developing 10 new prototype pieces, a massive undertaking that would strain our production capacity and require hiring additional craftspeople. When I raised practical concerns about timeline and resources, Drew suggested I was undermining exciting new opportunities because they weren't my idea. Longtime employees began stopping by my office with confused questions. "Are we still prioritizing the Henderson Hotel order?" Martin asked one afternoon. Drew told the team to put it on hold to focus on the showcase pieces, but that contract has penalties for late delivery. "Who told him to do that?" I asked, feeling my blood pressure rise. "He said it came directly from your dad," Martin replied, looking uncomfortable. "But that doesn't make sense given how you have been stressing the importance of the Henderson timeline." Rebecca had been my rock throughout this deteriorating situation, listening to my frustrated venting and offering clear-eyed perspective. "You need to force a direct conversation," she advised. "No Drew, no deflection. Make your parents acknowledge what is happening." I tried. For 3 weeks, I requested a private meeting with my parents. Each attempt was met with excuses or suggestions to include Drew, since this affects everyone. Finally, I wrote a formal email detailing my concerns about business direction, financial health, and communication breakdown, requesting a formal response. The reply came from Drew's email address, not my parents'. "We appreciate your thoughts and will take them under advisement as we continue planning for Franklin's exciting next chapter." That night, I compiled a comprehensive presentation about our business health, complete with financial projections, customer feedback trends, and specific recommendations. I stayed until 2 in the morning finalizing it, determined to make one last attempt to right the ship. The next morning, Mom called. "Your father and I would like to have a family meeting at the house tomorrow evening. There are some important matters we need to discuss." A surge of hope rose in my chest. Perhaps they had finally recognized the problems and were ready to address them seriously. "I will be there," I promised. "I have put together some analysis I think will be really helpful for us moving forward." "Oh," she sounded oddly deflated. "Yes, bring whatever you think is important. 6 o'clock. Drew will be there too. Something in her tone sent a warning flare through my mind, but I pushed it aside. This was the opportunity. I had been waiting for a chance to reset our course before irreversible damage was done. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 6 o'clock the following evening, presentation folder tucked under my arm. The first thing I noticed was our family lawyer's black Mercedes parked in the driveway. Stanley had handled our business affairs for years, but his presence at what I had understood to be a family meeting immediately set alarm bells ringing. Mom answered the door wearing the strained smile I recognized from childhood visits to the dentist. "Jason, come in. Everyone is in the living room." I stepped into the house I had grown up in, now filled with furniture I had either made myself or had direct involvement in creating. Drew was already seated in Dad's favorite armchair, looking unusually formal in a button-down shirt. Dad stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel I had crafted for their 30th anniversary. Stanley sat at the dining table, legal papers arranged neatly before him. "What is going on?" I asked the presentation folder, suddenly feeling heavy in my hands. "Have a seat, son," Dad said, gesturing to the couch. "We have some important matters to discuss." Mom brought in coffee I didn't want, and homemade cookies nobody touched. Small talk stretched painfully until Dad finally cleared his throat. "As you know, your mother and I aren't getting any younger. We have been thinking about succession planning for the business, ensuring Franklin Custom Furniture continues to thrive for generations to come." I nodded cautiously. This was precisely what I wanted to discuss, though the presence of the lawyer still troubled me. "We have always been proud of your contributions," Jason, Dad continued, sounding like he was reading from a script. "You have helped build the company into what it is today." The past tense wasn't lost on me. "I am still building it," I said quietly. Dad exchanged glances with Mom, who took over. "The furniture industry is changing rapidly. We need to position ourselves for the future, embrace new design concepts, new marketing approaches." That is exactly what I wanted to talk about. I began reaching for my folder. "I have compiled some data." Jason, Dad interrupted, his voice firmer now. "We have made our decision. After careful consideration, we have decided that Drew will assume full ownership of Franklin Custom Furniture upon our retirement." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "Drew has demonstrated a vision for the company that aligns with where the market is heading," Dad continued. His background in architectural design, his fresh perspectives, his lack of any actual experience in this business, I cut in, my voice shaking. His complete absence during the 15 years I poured my life into building this company. Stanley cleared his throat. "If I may," he interjected, "the legal structure we're proposing includes a generous financial settlement for you, Jason." He slid a document across the table. "This acknowledges your past contributions, while allowing for the unified direction the business needs moving forward." I glanced down at the paper, the words swimming before my eyes. What registered was a dollar amount, a fraction of what the business was worth, what my 15 years of 60-hour weeks had helped create. "You are buying me out," I said flatly. "After all these years of talking about our family business and how someday it would be our company, you are just cutting me out completely." Drew spoke for the first time, his voice dripping with rehearsed compassion. "Jason, this isn't personal. It is about what is best for the company's future. You will always be valued for your contributions." I turned to stare at him, this brother who had swooped in after all the hard work was done. "When exactly was this decided? How long have you all been planning this behind my back, while I continued working my ass off for the company?" The uncomfortable glances between my parents told me everything. "You have known for months," I realized aloud. "All those closed-door meetings, the Chicago trip, the sudden client redistributions, you have been implementing this plan while I was still believing we were partners." "We didn't want to disrupt day-to-day operations," Dad said weakly. A bitter laugh escaped me. "No, you just wanted to extract every last bit of work from me before showing me the door." I turned to my mother, who at least had the decency to look ashamed. "All those times I tried to talk to you about what was happening, you knew exactly what was coming." "We will always be family," she offered lamely. "Family doesn't do this," I said, standing up so abruptly that my coffee cup tipped over the dark liquid, spreading across the table towards Stanley's pristine documents. No one moved to clean it up. "We understand this is a shock," Dad began. "A shock." My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. A shock is an unexpected weather change. This is a betrayal. 15 years, Dad. 15 years of putting this business before everything else in my life. Turning down other opportunities. Missing friends' weddings because we had deadlines. Not taking a single vacation in 8 years. And we appreciate Drew started. You don't get to speak right now, I snapped, pointing at him. You showed up 5 minutes ago with fancy terminology and zero actual skills. You haven't earned the right to decide anything about this company. Drew's compassionate mask slipped, revealing the smug satisfaction beneath. The decision isn't yours to make. The company has always belonged to Mom and Dad, and now they have chosen the direction they wanted to take. He gave me what I suppose he thought was a magnanimous smile. We will, of course, take care of longtime employees like you. Like me. The rage that surged through me was like nothing I had ever experienced. I am not an employee. I am the reason this business survived the recession. I am the reason we have clients in 3 states. I designed our most successful product lines. With my guidance, Dad interjected, which I paid for with years of underpaid work based on promises that someday this would be my company too. I countered, turning back to him. Promises you are now breaking, because what Drew talks a better game, uses fancier words, reminds you of yourself, at his age. Dad's face hardened. That is enough, Jason. I understand you are upset, but this decision is final. You can accept the settlement and transition to a consulting role, or you can leave entirely. Those are your options. Mom began to cry the tears I was certain she had rehearsed as thoroughly as Dad had rehearsed his speech. We never wanted it to be like this, she said. We love you both so much. Not equally, I replied, my voice now deadly calm, as the initial shock gave way to cold clarity. You never have. I walked out without another word, leaving the presentation folder unopened on the coffee table. The research, the analysis, the plans for saving the company from Drew's expensive mistakes, none of it mattered. The decision had been made long before I walked through the door. I drove aimlessly for hours, eventually finding myself back at the workshop long after everyone had gone home. Using my key, I entered the darkened space filled with the smell of wood and varnish that had defined most of my life. I walked through the production floor past the machines I had selected and purchased the workstations I had designed for maximum efficiency, the pieces in various stages of completion, many following my designs. In my small office, I sat in the dark and finally allowed the emotions to overwhelm me. Years of memories flooded back. Dad teaching me to use a lathe. Mom proudly showing clients pieces I had helped create late nights. Problem-solving production issues. The satisfaction of seeing our furniture in homes and businesses. All of it now tainted by the knowledge that despite their words, my parents had never truly seen me as an equal heir to the legacy we had built together. Rebecca found me there around midnight, having guessed where I might go after I wasn't answering my phone. She said nothing, just held me while I struggled to articulate the magnitude of the betrayal. 15 years, I kept repeating. 15 years. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake beside Rebecca, mentally retracing every sacrifice, every milestone, every conversation about our family business, and when you take over someday. Had there been signs I missed? Had they always intended for Drew to be the true successor with me, merely the caretaker, until he was ready? Or had his return truly changed their perspective so dramatically? By morning, one truth had crystallized through the emotional haze. Despite all their talk of family legacy, my parents had never seen me as an equal owner of the business I had helped build. I had been an employee with delusions of partnership, kept motivated by promises that had always been conditional. The week that followed ranks among the most surreal of my life. I went to work as usual, sat at my desk, answered emails, and gave direction to the production team, all while feeling like I was watching someone else go through the motions. Employees sensed something was wrong, but didn't know how to ask. I caught concerned glances, noticed conversations that stopped when I approached. Drew, meanwhile, strutted around with newfound authority, inserting himself into projects he barely understood. He scheduled a meeting with our largest hotel client without consulting me, despite having no knowledge of their specific requirements or the history of our relationship with them. When I pointed this out, he smiled condescendingly. I have reviewed the file, Besides, they should get to know the future of the company. My parents avoided direct interaction, suddenly finding reasons to be out of the office when I was present. Dad communicated primarily through terse emails while Mom left awkward voicemails, checking if I was doing okay without acknowledging why I might not be. On Thursday, James Henley from Meridian Hotels, a client I had cultivated for 6 years, called me directly. "Jason, what is going on over there? I just had a meeting with your brother, who is suggesting changes to our established order mid-production. He is talking about design enhancements that would push delivery back by 8 weeks and increase costs by 30%. I closed my office door. "James, I apologize. There have been some organizational changes happening. I wasn't aware Drew had contacted you." "Well, he says he is speaking on behalf of the company leadership. Is that accurate?" The question cut deep. "He has my parents' confidence, I managed." "But not yours," James noted perceptively. "Look, we have worked together a long time. I trust your judgment and your commitment to deadlines. If the company is changing direction, I need to know now before we get any deeper into this project. Let me address this internally and call you back, I promised." The confrontation with Drew that followed was ugly but illuminating. When challenged about undermining established client relationships, he shrugged. "The Meridian account needs upgrading. They are ordering the same boring pieces year after year. Those boring pieces represent $600,000 in reliable annual revenue," I countered. "James Henley has referred us to 3 other hotel groups. And we are grateful for that history," Drew said, with practiced corporate insincerity. "But Franklin is evolving. If some legacy clients can't evolve with us, that's unfortunate, but necessary." That evening, Rebecca researched legal options while I paced her apartment. "Without a written partnership agreement or specific promises in your parents' will, your options are limited," she concluded grimly. "You could potentially sue for something called promissory estoppel, basically arguing you made life decisions based on promises they made, but it would be messy, expensive, and destroy any remaining family relationship." "What family relationship?" I asked bitterly. "They threw away 15 years of trust." "I know," she said softly. "I am just saying you need to decide if a legal battle is where you want to put your energy right now." The next morning in the workshop, while reviewing production schedules, the panic attack hit without warning. One moment I was checking measurements for a conference table. The next I couldn't breathe, my heart racing as the walls seemed to close in. I made it to my office before anyone noticed, closing the door and collapsing into my chair, gasping for air in the space that had once been my sanctuary. When the physical symptoms finally subsided, a clarity emerged through the emotional fog. I needed distance to think clearly. That afternoon I requested 2 weeks of accumulated vacation time, effective immediately. Dad approved it without comment, perhaps relieved to have me out of the way while they continued their transition. I drove to Rebecca's family cabin 3 hours north, a rustic retreat on a small lake where cell service was spotty and internet non-existent. For the first 2 days I did nothing but sleep, my body finally processing the physical toll of the stress. On the 3rd day, I began walking the perimeter of the lake, sometimes for hours, letting my mind work through what had happened and what should come next. By the end of the first week, anger had given way to something approaching clarity. I could see now that the business had been changing under my feet for months while I desperately tried to maintain what I thought we stood for. My parents had made their choice, a choice that revealed how they truly saw me, despite years of suggesting otherwise. I returned to work the following Monday, with a plan only to discover my office had been partially cleaned out. My design files had been moved to the shared server, my project notebooks relocated. The space itself had been reduced by half, a new temporary wall installed while I was away. What happened to my office? I demanded, finding Dad in the workshop. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We needed to expand the design area. Your brother thought, since you handle more of the production side now." "My brother thought," I repeated flatly. Dad sighed, glancing around to ensure no employees were within earshot. "Jason, I think it might be time for you to consider moving on. This transition period is clearly difficult for everyone. The settlement offer is still on the table." "Moving on," I echoed. "After 15 years, you are suggesting I just walk away from everything I have helped build." "You would be well compensated," he said, as if that addressed the fundamental betrayal. Later that day, I discovered Drew had been telling suppliers I was pursuing other opportunities, effectively undermining my authority while I was still ostensibly employed. 2 vendors called to wish me well in my future endeavors, conversations that left me speechless. Several employees sought me out privately, expressing confusion about the changing leadership structure. Martin, looking more stressed than I had ever seen him, closed my office door before speaking. "Level with me, Jason. Are you leaving? Because things are getting chaotic, and Drew keeps making promises to clients that the production team can't possibly keep." "I am still figuring things out," I admitted. "But I appreciate your loyalty, Martin. It means a lot." That weekend, I met with an independent business consultant, showing him our financial records and explaining the situation without the emotional overlay. His assessment was blunt. Based on current trajectories, they will face significant cash flow problems within 6 months. The new initiatives are too capital intensive, with too long a return horizon. They are burning through reserves at an unsustainable rate. It was the validation I needed, confirmation that my concerns weren't merely emotional reactions or resistance to change. The business I had helped build was being steered toward a cliff by someone without the experience to recognize the danger signs. The question now was simple but profound: fight or walk away? The decision crystallized over a long weekend of soul-searching. Fighting to remain in a business where I was clearly unwanted would be a Pyrrhic victory at best. Even if I somehow forced my way back in through legal means, the trust was irreparably broken. I would be working alongside people who had conspired behind my back for months, my own family. Monday morning, I drafted my resignation letter, professional, detailed, and unemotional. It documented my concerns about business direction and financial stability without accusation or bitterness. I outlined the projects I would transition and suggested timelines for handover. What I didn't include was any mention of returning, any suggestion that this was a negotiating tactic. This was a clean break. I requested a meeting with my parents, which was granted with suspicious speed. Drew insisted on attending, positioning himself symbolically at our father's right hand in the conference room. "Before you say anything," Dad began, "we want you to know we have considered your concerns and are prepared to offer an enhanced settlement package." He nodded to Drew, who slid a folder across the table, with the air of someone bestowing a great favor. I left it unopened. "I appreciate that, but I am here to submit my resignation effective 2 weeks from today." I handed each of them a copy of my letter. "I have outlined a transition plan for my current projects and responsibilities." The relief on their faces was impossible to miss. They had been preparing for a fight and got capitulation instead. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't surrendering. I was choosing a different battlefield. "Well," Dad said, after skimming the letter, "this is very professional. We appreciate your cooperation during this transition." Drew couldn't contain his triumph. "This is the right decision for everyone. We will make sure your final weeks are smooth." My final 2 weeks at Franklin Custom Furniture were oddly liberating. I meticulously documented everything about my role, created comprehensive handover notes, and held training sessions with staff who would assume my responsibilities. I avoided conversations about future plans, deflecting questions with vague comments about exploring options. Meanwhile, I was carefully documenting my contributions to the business. Over the years, designs I had created, systems I had implemented, client relationships I had built. I reviewed my employment contract with a fine-tooth comb, confirming what I had suspected, while the business owned the physical designs created during my employment. The underlying design methodology and production techniques were not explicitly covered. During my last week, several key employees approached me privately to express concerns about the company's direction. Martin was the most direct. "Between us, Jason, this place is becoming unrecognizable. Drew has no idea how production actually works, but he is making promises to clients that we can't possibly keep." On my final day, I declined the awkward goodbye lunch my mother tried to organize. Instead, I quietly packed my personal belongings, sent a brief email thanking the staff for their years of collaboration, and walked out the door of the business that had been the center of my life for 15 years. The next phase began immediately. Using savings and a small business loan, I secured a modest workshop space across town. I purchased essential equipment, not the high-end machinery of Franklin's production floor, but solid tools that would allow quality craftsmanship. Within 3 weeks, I had set up a functional, if Spartan, workshop in my garage while searching for a permanent location. Rebecca proved invaluable during this transition, not just emotionally, but practically. She helped design a simple website, leveraged her interior design contacts, and even assisted with setting up basic accounting systems. "You are too talented to work for someone else," she insisted, when I mentioned possibly joining another furniture maker. "This is your chance to create something that truly reflects your vision." My first bold move was reaching out to selected clients, not all but those with whom I had built personal relationships over the years. My message was simple and honest. I had left Franklin to pursue my own creative direction, and would be honored to work with them in my new venture if they were interested. The response was immediate and overwhelming. James Henley, from Meridian Hotels, called within an hour of receiving my email. "Thank goodness," he said without preamble. "Your brother just tried to sell us on some conceptual redesign that would double our costs and miss our opening deadline by months. When can we meet to discuss transferring our order to you?" Ethically, I declined to take over existing Franklin contracts. "I can't in good conscience ask you to break agreements already in place," I explained, "but I would be happy to discuss future projects or anything not yet under contract." James appreciated the integrity, but was blunt. "We will fulfill our current obligations to Franklin, but consider Meridian your client moving forward. Your brother does not understand our business needs or respect our budget constraints." Similar conversations followed with other long-standing clients who valued reliability, craftsmanship, and straightforward business dealings over Drew's visionary but impractical concepts. Within a month, I had enough committed projects to sustain my fledgling business for 6 months. My first independent commission was for a law firm in Seattle, a conference table and matching credenza. I poured everything into those pieces, working 16-hour days, to ensure they exceeded expectations. When the senior partner called to express his delight with the results, the validation was sweeter than any I had experienced under the Franklin name. Word spread quickly in the industry. My pricing was fair, but not cheap. I had no interest in competing on cost, only on quality and reliability. The business name came naturally, Craftsman Legacy Furniture, a nod to the traditional skills I honored while building my own legacy distinct from the Franklin name. 3 months after my departure, I received a call from an industry contact about Franklin Custom Furniture, struggling with delivery delays and quality control issues. I refused to comment or criticize, simply stating that I wished them well, but was focused on my own venture now. Privately, the news confirmed what I had predicted. Drew's ambitious promises were colliding with production realities he didn't understand. I maintained this professional stance even when opportunities arose to badmouth my former family business. When a local business magazine requested an interview about why I had left the family empire, I declined, suggesting they focus instead on my new enterprise and its commitment to craftsmanship. The most unexpected development came 6 months into my new venture. Caroline Westfield, representing the Anderson Hotel Group, Franklin's largest client, contacted me requesting a meeting. I assumed they wanted to discuss a small side project, but the reality was far more significant. "We have been with Franklin for 8 years, Caroline explained over coffee. "But frankly, the quality has declined dramatically in recent months, and they have missed 3 consecutive delivery deadlines. We have a major renovation project coming up for 5 properties. We would like to award that contract to you." The project she outlined would require expanding my operation significantly, hiring at least 6 craftspeople, leasing larger space, purchasing additional equipment. It was a risk but a calculated one, with a client known for reliability and prompt payment. "I will need to scale up," I acknowledged, "but I can commit to your timeline and quality requirements." That afternoon I signed a lease on a 5,000 square foot workshop space and began recruiting skilled woodworkers. My first call was to Martin, who answered with what sounded like relief in his voice. "I was hoping you would call eventually," he said. "Things have gotten worse." Drew hired his friend as production manager, despite having no experience. Half the team is looking for other jobs. "How would you feel about joining Craftsman Legacy?" I asked. "I just landed the Anderson Hotel Group contract and need a production manager I can trust." His acceptance was immediate. Within 2 weeks, he joined me, bringing 2 other skilled craftspeople from Franklin, who had grown disillusioned with the new regime. I was careful not to actively poach employees, but I welcomed those who reached out. The business grew organically from there. Each successful project led to referrals. Rebecca's interior design connections brought in residential clients who appreciated fine craftsmanship. A furniture critic for a national magazine featured my work in a spread about American craftsmanship in the digital age, bringing broader recognition. 9 months after striking out on my own Craftsman Legacy Furniture, was profitable, employing 11 people, including myself, with a reputation for exceptional quality and reliability. Our workshop had become a place where craftsmanship was respected, creativity encouraged, and every employee felt valued for their contributions. Meanwhile, rumors circulated about Franklin Custom Furniture facing mounting financial troubles. Drew had apparently convinced my parents to invest heavily in a showroom in San Francisco that failed to generate projected returns. Their cash reserves, the ones I had carefully built up, were reportedly depleted. I took no pleasure in their struggles, but I couldn't deny the validation it provided. The concerns I had raised, dismissed as resistance to change, had proven prescient. 1 year to the day after my resignation, Craftsman Legacy Furniture hosted an open house celebrating our first anniversary and the expansion into a second workshop space. The event attracted clients, industry partners, and local media, a testament to how quickly we had established ourselves as a respected presence in the custom furniture world. Mid-afternoon, as I was demonstrating joinery techniques to an interested group, Rebecca touched my elbow. "Your parents are here," she whispered. They stood awkwardly near the entrance, Dad looking older than I remembered, Mom clutching her purse with nervous energy. Drew was noticeably absent. I excused myself from the demonstration and approached them, maintaining a professional smile. "Thank you for coming. Would you like a tour?" The conversation was stiff but civil as I showed them around the thriving workshop. Dad examined the production systems with quiet appreciation, occasionally asking technical questions that I answered without elaboration. Mom commented on the lovely atmosphere and how everyone seemed so happy. Near the end of their visit, Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother and I thought it might be good to clear the air. Perhaps we could have dinner sometime next week." I agreed, more out of curiosity than any expectation of reconciliation. The dinner at a neutral restaurant downtown was an exercise in careful conversation. They spoke of industry changes, mutual acquaintances, and Rebecca's recent promotion at her design firm, everything except what had happened between us. Finally, after the main course, Dad set down his fork. "We may have been hasty in some of our decisions last year." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was as close as he was likely to come. "Franklin is facing some challenges," Mom added delicately. "The San Francisco location hasn't performed as expected." I nodded, waiting for them to continue. "Drew has some wonderful creative ideas. Dad said loyalty to his younger son's still evident, but the implementation has been more complex than anticipated." "Business often is," I replied neutrally. They never explicitly acknowledged the wrongness of their actions or the pain they had caused. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful admission of regret. But in their careful words, and the fact they had sought me out at all, I recognized a limited acknowledgement that their decision had not yielded the results they had anticipated. As we parted, Dad hesitated before asking, "Would you consider consulting with us on some production issues, just temporarily, to help straighten things out?" The request was so unexpected I almost laughed. "I appreciate the offer, but my focus needs to remain on Craftsman Legacy. We are in a growth phase that requires my full attention." The rejection was gentle, but firm. A year ago, I would have leapt at any opportunity to be valued by them again. Now I recognized it for what it was, a tactical request, rather than a genuine attempt to restore what had been broken. My business continued to thrive while Franklin struggled. Drew implemented increasingly desperate measures, slashing prices, compromising on materials, overpromising on timelines that only accelerated their decline. 6 months after our dinner, industry gossip indicated they had closed the San Francisco showroom and laid off nearly half their staff. I took no pleasure in their difficulties. The legacy my grandfather had started that my father had built upon, that I had helped modernize it, deserved better than a slow decline driven by mismanagement. But I had made my peace with the fact that their choices were no longer my responsibility. Meanwhile, Craftsman Legacy expanded thoughtfully, maintaining quality and employee satisfaction as our guiding principles. Rebecca now worked with us full-time heading client relations and design consultation. Our team had grown to 23 people, each selected not just for skill, but for their commitment to craftsmanship and collaborative spirit. On a crisp fall evening during a weekend getaway to celebrate 2 years of Craftsman Legacy, I proposed to Rebecca by a lakeside remarkably similar to where I had retreated during my darkest moments after leaving Franklin. You believed in me when I barely believed in myself, I told her, as I offered a ring box containing a wooden band I had crafted from the first piece of furniture I ever made. I want to build our future together both personally and professionally. Her tearful yes marked another milestone in the new life I had created from the ashes of betrayal. The healing process had not been linear. There were still moments when the hurt resurfaced, seeing my parents at industry events, hearing Franklin mentioned by clients driving past the workshop where I had spent so many formative years. But those moments no longer carried their former power. The anger had transformed into something closer to wisdom, an understanding that while I couldn't control others' actions, I could determine how those actions shaped me. The most unexpected validation came when Craftsman Legacy received the Regional Excellence in Business Ethics Award, recognizing not just our quality products but our commitment to fair treatment of employees, suppliers, and clients. Standing at the podium, accepting the award, I spotted my parents in the audience they had attended without telling me. Their expressions were complex pride, mingled with regret, perhaps even a recognition of what they had lost. Today, 3 years after that fateful family meeting where my world collapsed, I lead a thriving business built on principles I truly believe in. I mentor young craftspeople, encouraging them to develop both technical skills and business acumen. Our workshop operates on a profit-sharing model, ensuring everyone benefits from our collective success. The greatest lesson from this painful journey has been about self-worth and recognition. For years, I measured my value through my parents' approval, accepting lower compensation and unclear promises because I craved their validation. Now, I understand that true security comes not from others' acknowledgement, but from building something authentic to your own values. I have learned, too, about the importance of clear agreements, how someday, and eventually, are dangerous words in business, even perhaps, especially when family is involved. I insist on transparent written agreements with every stakeholder in Craftsman Legacy, leaving nothing to assumption or verbal promises. Perhaps most importantly, I have learned to recognize toxic relationships, how love and exploitation can sometimes wear the same face, how loyalty can become a chain rather than a bond. The family we choose, the community we build around shared values and mutual respect can provide stronger foundations than the family we are born into. Do I still feel pain about what happened? Sometimes. But I no longer define myself by that betrayal. Instead, I focus on the legacy I am building now, one based on integrity, craftsmanship, and genuine relationships. For those of you watching who might be facing similar family business challenges or betrayals, remember that your worth isn't determined by others' recognition. Sometimes, the most painful endings lead to the most authentic beginnings. Have you experienced a family betrayal that ultimately led to a better path? Drop a comment below sharing your story. Your experience might help someone else who is where you once were. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes being pushed out of where you thought you belonged leads to finding where you truly should be. Thank you for listening to my journey. May your own path, however winding, lead you to where you are truly valued.